Sound and data.
So this is Sophia Roosth, and she is background in cultural anthropology. Now, let me see if I get this straight. But her real interest now is really in the history of science, right?
So I trained in cultural anthropology, and I got my PhD at MIT in a program with a very long acronym, but I focused on anthropology of science and science studies. And now I teach in a history of science department.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So do you know Patrick McRae at all? Have you met him?
I do.
Oh, yeah. He's a mutual friend then.
Mm.
Really interesting guy. He's, he's very close with Roger because of Frank Molina and his
that
father.
makes sense.
Yeah, and the whole rocket age thing.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, but we're going to focus in on sound and data since this is a sound and data channel. And the thing that caught my eye when I was looking through the blurb I got when you showed up this week was this idea of listening to, since your latest work is sort of focused on cell biology and biological, and the practice of science and the history of biological sciences and that kind of stuff.
That's right.
But you, for some reason, the write-up included this thing about sort of listening to cell life and how it impacted the observation of biologists. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Sure. So I became interested in some sounds I heard coming from a lab of a researcher named Jim Jimchevsky. Jim Jimchevsky is a nanotechnologist who works at UCLA, and he was one of the pioneers of scanning tunneling microscopy and atomic force microscopy, which are very common tools in nanotech. And the way they work, and it's going to be hard for me to explain without gesturing on the podcast, but
well, I can make whooshing sounds while you...
So normally an AFM microscope has a probe, and the probe moves back and forth in a raster fashion across...
Like that?
It sounds just like that, in fact. Over the surface of, any kind of nanoscopic surface, and then can kind of make what would be sort of like a topological map of that surface. And what Jimchevsky decided to do was hold the probe stationary, and instead of making a map, try to record vibrations. And he wanted to work with first he wanted to work with mammalian cells, but discovered that they were too soft, and he chose yeast because they have a cell wall. So he placed the probe on the surface of yeast, and he was surprised to discover that they vibrate within the frequency of human hearing. Obviously not within the amplitude, but within the frequency. So he essentially turned up the volume on the yeast and started listening to them in different environments. So what do they sound like in a normal environment? What do they sound like when you put a chemical like sodium azide or ethanol on them? What happens when they're dead? What happens when metabolic functioning stops? And you can actually hear the difference between these different states of the cell, and he has a way of explaining it in terms of, for example, the metabolic pumps in the cell wall working overtime to expel certain chemicals that are noxious to the yeast, and you can hear that as a rise in frequency.
A sort of a scream, from what I remember. Right,
he describes it as a scream. He has a lot of metaphors, so he talks about it as a scream, as similar to whale sounds. He describes the probe of the microscope as a record needle. So there are lots of sonic analogies that get built into the way he thinks about this process.
You probably run into this kind of anthropomorphizing of things in general. Have you looked further into other people that are using sound as part of their research epistemology? Or
a little bit, and I've done a lot of reading about it, although there isn't as much at the interface of sound studies and science studies as I would like. I think it's a growing field, but we're not quite there yet.
Everybody has this instinct about it, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it's really completely, compared to where visualization and data visualization and just visualization techniques, compared to where sonification techniques are. I mean, I'm coming from like a computer music background and that kind of stuff, and so I know what the state of the technology is, and it's just really, there isn't really a toolkit like there is like D3 or something. Oh, there's all sorts of visualization toolkits, Maya, AutoCAD, but there's no real equivalent in the sound area yet. I mean,
and I think the same is true analytically for history of science and science studies. We know how to talk about scientific aesthetics. We know how to talk about the visualization of science.
Right.
And we haven't been able to fully disengage from a kind of ocular centrism, focusing on things like maps, charts, graphs.
No, I'm going to go outside of the box a little bit,
Yeah.
because the most fascinating thing for me, just this is my own personal interest, was you went beyond the hearing and into the other senses, like particularly the culinary one, which I mean, this is really an aside from the Sound and Data channel, but I'm going to go there, which is, this idea of microbiological cooking techniques and that kind of stuff. I mean, kimchi, right? They say when the blizzard happens in New York City, all the stores run out of kimchi, and I forget the other thing, but but that's all microbiology, right? That's fungal, whatever it is. So, what's your work in that area? Just sort of tracking it, or?
Well, given what I just said about ocular centrism in history, science, and science studies,
Right.
I became interested in trying to find the many ways that non-visual senses function as both an object of scientific inquiry and a tool of scientific inquiry. So how do we study sound, smell, taste, and touch as senses, and how do scientists use those senses to learn more about the living world around them? And the work I did on taste was based on research in a molecular gastronomy laboratory in Paris. What I found there was that people were both scientizing taste and experimentalizing it in a way in order to formalize what counts as good taste and good culinary practice, but they were also finding new ways to describe food and taste in a biochemical idiom. And that was an attempt to universalize taste.
Relative to the tongue and that kind of thing, and the areas of the tongue.
Yeah, sort of like organoleptic sensation, what something tastes like.
Organoleptic, boy, that's a term I haven't. I like that. I'm going to use that one. Wow,
What does that mean?
So to distinguish taste as, good taste, as, cultural refinement versus the actual experience of what something is like in your mouth.
Well, the one that got me is umami, right? There's this other taste that's like this kind of, I know it when I see it.
When you taste it.
Yeah, when I taste, sorry. When I hear it. Anyway, okay, so let's get back to sound. Sorry, I just think, I personally, totally into multimodal representation. And Florian Grund in another interview on this same channel had this thing about we shouldn't let the output channels of the computers that we're using define our understanding of reality, which was a great statement that he made, and I totally get what he's saying. It's like, okay, so we have to use a video card for the video, we have to use a sound card. That doesn't mean that our experience of reality isolates those two. And there was even some, it was Margaret Shadell, who's another person that we've had on the channel, was asking about synesthesia, and it was Roger Molina who pointed out to me that there was like this study that found out when you hear alarming sudden noises that your pupils contract. It's like just a autonomic. So there is a synesthesia that's at least linked to loud sounds and stuff. Anyway. Okay, I'm digressing clearly. So let's get back to in the area of sound, what's your research led to? You're speaking about that infrasound. Maybe you could.
Right. So this actually grew out of a class I teach on non-visual sensing in the sciences. And for Sound Week, I was looking for all sorts of interesting scientific sounds that I could have the students listen to. And one of the things that I noticed about sound studies, or about some writers in sound studies, is that everyone has to define what counts as sound for them in order to carve out the project that they're going to do. And very often in sound studies, the definition of sound gets paired to an anthropocentric understanding of what sound is. So anything between 20 and 20,000 hertz counts as sound.
Right.
And it doesn't, that leaves out all the vibrations that are heard by other living things, and it leaves out the technical mediation that makes a lot of sounds possible. So I wanted to try to get at that liminal space where what we think of as sound bleeds into something that we think of as non-sound. And that's why I wanted to write about 19 hertz. It's precisely the vibration, it's precisely the frequency right below what counts as the threshold of human hearing.
Well, this is this other threshold, because the one that comes up all the time is the sound and music threshold. So what discoveries have you made at 19 hertz? What sort of things?
So 19 Hertz has a fascinating history in the 20th century, and it starts with the explosion of Krakatoa. Infrasonic vibrations circled the globe 7 times because the explosion was so powerful. And that led scientists to realize that infrasound, while inaudible, travels much further than audible sound. And not much happened immediately after that, so I found a good deal of sci-fi literature in the first decades of the 20th century that talks about how to weaponize infrasound, but things get really messy when you get to the Cold War. So as soon as the Cold War happens, infrasound...
And the open-air nuclear test ban treaty, probably,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So once the above-ground nuclear weapons test ban treaty is passed, infrasound becomes a way of indexing which countries are not participating in the ban.
Right.
So you can figure out which countries are detonating nuclear weapons above ground by using these infrasonic stations. Around the same time, there was a scientist named Vladimir Gavreau who discovered that his research assistants in his laboratory had this horrible sense of anxiety and unease.
In Marseille, right?
In Marseille. And
important.
he determined that this was caused by a standing vibration at 19 hertz. He fixed the problem. It was in a broken fan in the lab. And the research assistants felt better. But then there were a series of UNESCO reports stating that he was trying to weaponize it and create what they called a sonic death whistle that would jellify human organs.
Woohoo! Sounds like fun.
And at first I thought that this was just a bit of Cold War paranoia, but I found similar reports going up to 2010. And now, with the emergence of wind turbine syndrome as a contested illness, infrasound is now being used by people who claim to suffer from wind turbine syndrome as an explanation for why they have these symptoms, which sound just like the ones in Gavreau's lab.
So this is the people that work on the renewable energy resource wind turbines. Is that...
These are people who live near wind turbine fields and have anxiety, inability to sleep, headaches, nausea, dizziness, things like that.
God, just...
Why would it? How could they gel? How would it gel your organs?
Oh, I don't think it actually can.
But that was some hyperbole.
I think, it must be hyperbole. But the idea was that each of your organs resonates at a certain frequency, and if you can hit the right frequency, then you can jellify or explode human organs.
Boy, that sounds like a real pain.
Yeah. And then a really crazy thing that's happened in the last 10 years, just to kind of cap this off, is infrasound is now something that's being actively argued about in communities that are either ghost hunters or debunkers of ghost hunters. Some ghost hunters say that infrasound attends ghostly visitations, and others say that actually infrasound can cause people to hallucinate, and that's why
that
they
makes
think
sense.
they're seeing or hearing ghosts.
Yeah, right, because of the... I love this. I used there's a whole thing in the radio spectrum where people think they're hearing ghost sounds and stuff like that just from shortwave stuff. I think I really love that area. Was there any other area of science and sound that I might not have come across, since you have a whole class in it, which I want to take?
It's all the senses, right? All the senses.
Well, sorry.
I'm
focusing on
non-visual senses, so I go much. I go beyond the sensory hierarchy. So we dip into kinesthesia, synesthesia, proprioception, ESP. We do the whole thing.
ESP, wow.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I wish I knew it existed. I mean, I have a sense that it's there. But anyway, so I guess that's about it. We're about ready to wrap up this one, but there's a ton of stuff. So maybe we'll call again when something else comes up, then we can talk about it. The one thing about infrasound I was thinking of, just before, was that aren't elephants and like whales, they use these lower frequencies
they do.
to get all the distance.
Elephants have the ability to use infrasonic vibrations to send messages across great distances. And there was a researcher, I think she was at Cornell, but don't quote me. Oh, wait, I'm on a podcast. Who went to an elephant preserve and set up a speaker that would play infrasonic vibrations on a truck. And she drove the truck around among the elephants and started being followed by male elephants because her theory is that she was sending an infrasonic vibration that announced that
Ready
there was
to go.
a female elephant.
Yeah. Ready to roll.
In the area.
Yeah, I think I saw that was like a BBC special. That's where I knew that
Oh,
little factoid
interesting.
that I saw her driving around in her truck.
Yeah.
So
But I
just
can't remember if
whales
she's
and
from
elephants,
Cornell.
Nothing else that we know right now.
Not that I know of. I'm sure there
right.
are.
Well, I'm sure woolly mammoths,
Well, we may
Before they-
discover other things about animals that we don't know yet.
Well, I like one of the aspects of this, of what your perspective that I've picked up over the afternoon is this sort of debunking the anthropomorphization of this stuff, and also, did I say it wrong?
No, I added a different word, Anthropocene. It's a different thing.
Anthropocene, yeah. Okay. Anyway, well, okay, so we're out of time. Yeah. So let's go on for another 10 minutes. Why not?
Okay.
No, no. Thank you so much,
My
Sophia. It
pleasure.
was a pleasure to talk to you, and we'll do more later.
You as well. Thank
Okay,
you.
ciao.
Sound and data.